I don't even know, probably a teenager. After Thanksgiving, I watched The Family Stone, which isn't, I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's kind of not as well known, I would say. But it's about like grown adults coming home for Christmas, and like one of the sons is like bringing his partner home, and she's like really different from the rest of the family, and I don't know. It's a comedy and it's silly.
Nice. Thanks for jumping right in, Alex.
Ooh, I got mine. This is way back when my little brother was the youngest, and he was still small. He would always watch this movie over and over. It was the SpongeBob SquarePants movie when it first came out. Every day he would watch that, and every car ride he would play that on. So I remember almost every single line in that movie. But it's been a couple of years, so thankfully I don't remember him anymore. That was it.
Nice.
Every Christmas, like Christmas Day, my family watches A Christmas Story, the old movie with the kid who I recently discovered I have the same glasses as that kid, which was a bummer. But we've never missed a Christmas. Like even when my dad was at the fire station, we would go to the fire station and watch it with him. So that's probably the movie I've seen the most.
It's awesome.
Kind of weird, but I think I've seen Sky High so many times. So I know the plot.
Is that the Disney one? Yes, good. Mine is also an oldie but a goodie. I haven't seen it in far too long, but It Takes Two with Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen.
Devin, have you watched the new Netflix one with Vanessa Hudgens? Important question. It's in that vein. It's very similar of like Vanessa Hudgens talking to herself, and like one's fancy and one's normal Vanessa Hudgens. Places. So would recommend. I mean, it's not a good movie, but would recommend.
Good to know.
I have two, and I'm not sure which I've watched more. They're both children's films. The first is Horton Hears a Who, which is my favorite movie. And the second is the first Harry Potter movie, which I watch perennially.
Nice. Good combination.
So for me, I'm not a big movie person, but there are like kind of three movies I consistently watch no matter if they come on. They kind of cross all genres. One is like Minion. Well, technically four. It's like Minion / Despicable Me universe. Like I'm a big child like movie person. I love it. It was just on over break, so it's fun to watch in it. My second movie is The Proposal with Deadpool, aka Ryan Reynolds. It's a nice little romantic comedy. I love it. It's so sappy. And then the last one is called Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. It's like a satire. So if y'all watch any like scary movie like made by the Wayans brothers or any like their work, it's like one of those, and it's just funny. Like I don't know. I like to think during my movies a lot, or it's either I'm thinking a lot or I'm just like watching.
Awesome. Sounds like a good combination. See, I think we've gotten through most everybody. Let's see. Hafsa, Jenny, I don't recall if the two of you have gone yet.
No. I think it's between two movies. One is Halloween, the original. That movie I probably just watch consistently like every year since I was a kid, and the other movie is Grease. Just because that soundtrack is amazing. No, I haven't watched the remake. I should.
I would say growing up, I'd probably say it was like Lion King repetitively. I could never get tired of that. And also Mean Girls.
Hafsa, have you seen the new trailer for the new Lion King?
I have.
Oh my god, I'm so excited.
Me too.
Big year for Disney.
Sure. And let's see, I see that Denisha just joined us. Denisha, if you're able to, we're just wrapping up our check-in question about what movie you have seen the most times in your life. If you feel ready to jump in with that, feel free to go ahead.
Yes, so I'm an old soul. Therefore, The Temptations is the movie that I've seen the most. As a child, my grandparents and mom actually hid the movie from me because I watched it every day after school over and over again. And I found it, and I would still watch it after school and just put it right back in their hiding spot before they caught me watching it. So yeah, The Temptations.
Awesome. Sounds like you had a good system set up. All right, and I see Davi just joined us as well. Davi, I'll give you a chance. We're just wrapping up our check-in question here of what movie you feel like you've seen the most times in your life, if you'd be ready to share that.
It would definitely be Aliens.
Nice. That is the only reference to aliens on this list. So you stand in good company. I think every one of us named different movies, right? I don't think there are any duplicates. Yeah, cool. All right. So anything else from you, Grace, in terms of kicking us off? Okay. Well, I will turn it over to me because I'm the next one on the agenda. So how about that transition? Pretty smooth. Beyond the check-in question, the next part that we have are a variety of things in the update section for today. And as you'd see if you scan the full agenda, the intent for today is different than it has been kind of zoomed out. Other weeks we have had a full 3 hours of content that we're looking to engage in together, from discussions to updates covering curriculum topics. The scope of today is intended to share a couple updates, but to be efficient with our time, to not take that full time till noon. Instead, we're estimating that we would go until about 10 o'clock with sharing content, addressing questions that are out there, things like that, and then affording you some additional time to get things done. As I know that you have a lot on your plates, certainly already that you're working on in terms of supporting your students. And also, to name it here at the beginning, a couple of things I'll be going over in the update section are going to be action items for you to follow up on. And so the intent here is not just to leave you with more things to accomplish without time to do it, but the hope is that in that window of time, that extra 2 hours you'll be getting back, to jump right in, if that works for you, if you're able to start accomplishing a couple of these things, to start chipping away at them. So does that sound good? Seeing some nods? I'll take it. What we're looking at here is the fact that we're wrapping up the fall campaign. I'm sure that you know that. I'm sure that this has been high on your radar for some time, working towards the goals that you have with that campaign, with coaching your students, helping to make sure that they're on track. And with the campaign, the fall campaign wrapping up this Friday, we wanted to spend some time kind of a little bit in review of looking at what we've been focused on during this first part of the year, with the last days ahead of us to try to accomplish those goals yet for what you're trying to achieve with your students between now and Friday. But then also to provide some context about the transition from this fall campaign to what comes next. And what comes next is priority coaching weeks. And so there are a couple elements that I'll be giving voice to with this transition. And I have a slide deck here that I'll call up so that it's not just listening to me, but especially for those who appreciate getting a chance to look at something, that you're able to look at something too. So I'm going to call up and share my PowerPoint here. Okay. So hopefully that is on the screen now. The transition to priority coaching weeks. So just to name it too, I'll be going through this slide deck, but please, I hope you always know that you're always welcome to interrupt me when I'm going through content like this with any questions or things that are on your mind. So please feel free to jump in whenever it makes sense for you. All right, so with the fall campaign, as I mentioned, with this wrap up that we have this week, I wanted to spend a little bit of time reviewing what you've been focused on, what you've been accomplishing so far. I think that with so much focus on the day-to-day, it can sometimes be helpful to zoom out for a moment. And so as a reminder, the objectives that we've been trying to achieve so far in this year, both the fall campaign and the welcome weeks too, really trying to build rapport with your students, demonstrating the value to them of participating with you as a College Possible coach to increase their engagement, learning students' goals so that that can inform what your relationship with each of them individually is, and assessing any current obstacles or needs and troubleshooting those with them, especially related to financial aid or course registration. And another one that isn't called out here on the slide, but also is certainly a significant one for some of our campuses, is the very act of getting your students recruited or identified into the program. That looks different from campus to campus, and for some of our schools, that has been a very significant area of emphasis this early part of the year. So in addition to the objectives, we've talked about the tracked goals that we've been focused on during this early period. And so again, that's the having campaign coaching via any method with 90% of your enrolled students, seeing 75% of your enrolled students either in the fall persistence category 1 or 2. And then this is one that we've been having incremental benchmarks for, the financial aid renewal. And the benchmark for this coming Friday, the end of the fall campaign, is at 17%. And so aiming to see at least that many of your students, ideally having renewed their financial aid application to be in good shape for next year. And then spring registration is called out here, but as each campus is on a different schedule, recognizing it's campus specific in terms of what that goal is by this Friday. And so trusting that with the conversations you're having with your supervisor, that you are aware of what those goals are. And just to name it, if there is any gap that you're wondering, well, what is my goal by this Friday? Please make sure to bring that to your supervisor's attention, as I know that they would welcome that conversation and make sure you're on the same page about the goals that you're working towards. And so again, the fall campaign wrapping up this Friday. And so there's still days here, as was included in our weekly update email, the analogy to the marathon, that you are near the end of this fall campaign marathon and looking to have this be a really impactful week between you and your students to help get as close to these goals and achieve these goals as possible by this Friday. So that's what I wanted to have for just a brief period to review what we're currently engaged in with wrapping up the fall campaign. Are there questions out there about any of these elements about wrapping up the fall campaign before I'd have us shift gears to look ahead at priority coaching weeks?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, Devon.
So when I go to my dashboard to our progress report, and because I'm missing 9 students from our persistence categories, and I'm trying to find out who they are, but when I click on it, it doesn't show their names. Is there a way to fix it so that shows which students I'm contacted with for persistence categories and stuff like that?
That's a really good question, Devon. Thanks for calling that out. So there's going to be a report that we're going to be introducing to you that I don't think that we have yet so far related to persistence categories that will show you student by student who is in which persistence category and some of the indicators related to it. I'm going to go into some detail around that in a little bit because it has to do with some of the ways that we're going to be using persistence categories specifically as we get into priority coaching weeks. So I'm going to go into more depth on that in just a minute, if that's okay. Cool. Thanks for calling out the question. Are there other questions out there related to the current state of things with the fall campaign and coming to the end of that marathon?
I have a question.
Yeah, Allison.
So UC operates on that we have a group of students assigned to us, and I have about 20 students on that list who I've never heard a peep out of these students. As we're moving into priority coaching weeks, assuming that that doesn't change over this next week, how do I approach that group of students, given that they still have yet to make any kind of contact with me?
For sure. Thanks for asking. So one of the things that we'll be looking at, as I mentioned, with kind of a revamped way to use persistence categories as we look ahead, is that one of the categories will specifically pertain to students that we haven't had contact with. And so again, we'll be going into some more depth in just a couple minutes, but it's something that those would be students that we would want to try and still get connection with, so that we can understand, are they in good standing? Are they in good shape to persist to next semester? Hopefully, even though they haven't been responsive yet, this might be an opportunity for some fresh messaging or a fresh opportunity for them to reach back to you to answer with some information. It's also something that as we learn some of that information, hopefully those students are in good shape and are coming back next semester. But each school too, especially our cohort 2 schools like UC and our Iowa schools, where students have just joined a new program on campus, there will be conversations with your supervisor ongoing that if there are students who are simply not ever engaging with the program, at a certain point we need to have a conversation around if it makes sense for them to continue being on the roster for the program. So that's something that we could anticipate. But for this next period of the priority coaching weeks, there would be students that I would highlight as those to continue reaching out to, hoping that we do get some information, and hopefully we're hearing that they're in good shape to, or that there's something that you can do to support them to persist to next semester. Thanks for the question. All right, any other questions out there before I have us shift our gaze to the future?
So majority of my students are in category 3.
Yep.
Because majority of them are CPAS students, and really it's because they're failing like one class, but
okay,
they're good in the other areas.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I really don't. Yeah, that's just going to be a little difficult, and I'm not exactly sure how, because all of my students are Cincinnati Pride Grant recipients. Therefore, they have to keep 12 credit hours. Therefore, one of the classes that they may be failing, they can't drop because it'll put them under 9. Then they'll lose their money. Then they'll probably be in category 4 or 5. So I'm not exactly sure how that's going to turn out.
Yeah.
Because of the requirements that they have to fulfill.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I appreciate you kind of painting that picture. Couple thoughts that I have in response to it, Denisha. So one is, with our efforts to use persistence categories, these fall persistence categories so far, this is something that I think of a bit different than some of like the campaign coaching goal that we have, right? The campaign coaching goal is very much something that is, certainly it's a shared responsibility between a coach and the students to each participate, to each make that happen. There's certainly a lot that the coaches, that you as coaches have agency in to help make that happen, those coaching conversations. And there's also a lot of agency that coaches have in helping to get students into one of those fall persistence categories of 1 or 2. But more so with that goal, it's really the biggest part of it is an assessment of where are your students at, as opposed to something where if you're not able to get them there yet, that would be cause for significant concern, because we still have time here to help affect their likelihood to persist for next semester. And that's actually some of what I want to get into as we look ahead to this next part of the slides here about the priority coaching week. So if I can, I'm going to shift us ahead so we can talk a little bit more about how we'll be using persistence categories into the priority coaching weeks. All right, so up next, priority coaching weeks. Okay, and so with this, this is going to be a 3-week period. So it starts up this coming Monday, December 3rd. It's hard to believe we're already in December. And going into December 21st, thank you, December 21st. And so that leads right up into the time that, as I understand it, each of you will be on break. And that's something that is intentionally aligned. So 3-week period. Within this time, the objectives that we have set up with this coaching structure is to ensure that students are as prepared as possible to persist into the next semester, into the spring semester. So with this, I have that we'll be prioritizing engagement with select groups of students. So in this, you'll see that I'm referencing something called standard persistence categories, which I will be digging in deep in just a moment to explain what those are. And there are a few categories within those 2, 3, and 4 specifically that we'll be guiding you to focus on with the most emphasis. Part of this, as would be no surprise, I imagine, that helping students be as prepared as possible to persist in next semester includes, of course, addressing financial aid renewal, spring course registration, and then also resolving account balances if that is something that they are still trying to address in order to come back for next semester. So those as objectives, and then we can look at the next slide for some of our tracked goals. So the tracked goals within this next period, this next 3-week priority coaching period, include that 90% of enrolled students would be in standard persistence categories 1 or 2. And so again, I'll explain the difference between standard persistence categories and fall ones in just a moment. Financial aid renewal continues to progress, and so by the time we get to December 21st, the benchmark for that week is 26% of students would ideally have, of enrolled students would have completed financial aid renewal. And then again, spring registration continuing to progress on the schedule that you and your supervisor have in place. One thing that I have here as a note is something that is not a unique goal, a unique tracked goal within the priority coaching weeks. And that is that there isn't a unique campaign coaching percent to accomplish. So I just want to kind of provide some context around that. So far this year in Welcome Weeks and Fall Campaign, a big emphasis in how the program is structured is to help drive a broad survey of all of your students to understand and assess how are they doing, to get to know them, to build that rapport as we looked at for our fall objectives. And when we get to this last stage of the fall semester, at this point, you have done a lot of great effort to try and complete that survey of your students. And instead of having weekly benchmarks of needing to have a certain number of coaching conversations as the driver for your actions, really, we want your focus to be on now affecting all the agency that you have to support your students in getting them to these standard persistence categories 1 and 2. Essentially, whatever it takes to help make sure that they are ready to go to stay in school for next semester, as that's not always a linear thing. It might be multiple conversations with one student. It might be focusing on a subset of students as opposed to a broad survey of all students. And so we're hoping that in the structure of this priority coaching week that it can be just what it's named, priority coaching. The students who need it most are getting your attention. So that's the intent with this next period that we're going into these next few weeks. Oh, great. Thank you. And yes, do you want to give voice to that, please?
So the slides that John's referencing right now come from, or the information comes from a document that I just linked in the chat. So you can download that from Absorb if it's easier for you to see that all in one document.
Great, thank you, Grace. Okay, and so now I want to dig in about the persistence categories. So I know they've already come up in a number of good questions and a couple of my comments, but let's talk about persistence categories. So at a high level, they serve as a tool to know the college persistence health of your students at a glance in real time and help prioritize coaching attention effectively. So that's something that is how we think about these as a resource broadly. So far, what we've been focused on this year are what we've named these fall persistence categories. They've applied during Welcome Weeks and the fall campaign. The persistence indicators, which you'd know well, have to do with the current status of a student in terms of their finances, their personal wellness, and their academic stability. These are the persistence indicators that have been most tangible, the best predictors that we've had so far this year to use to understand how your students are doing and their likelihood to be on track for next semester. As we progress into the year, though, there are additional indicators that we can see as more tangible milestones moving forward that we want to make sure that we are not overlooking, and we want to shift our focus on what these indicators would be. So what we've looked at so far, the fall persistence categories. As we go ahead here, we're looking at standard persistence categories. So there's a distinction between those two terms. With standard persistence categories, these are a resource that would be intended for the same purpose, to be able to have that view at a glance of your students of their college persistence wellness overall. And it just will be driven by different indicators. They're related, but different. So at this time of year, your students, by and large, have opportunities to register for next semester. And we know both from literature in the field as well as research that College Possible has done on our own programming that course registration is one of the biggest predictors of whether students are going to come back next semester or not. And so that is one of the indicators for these standard persistence categories. Another one is financial aid renewal. Whether a student has completed financial aid renewal yet is a strong indicator that they plan to persist into next semester, because they're already working on something that is intended to propel them for next year even. And then the third item, which is called out here as an indicator, is whether or not they've had a campaign coaching conversation with you. At this time, there have been many weeks where they've had the opportunity to engage with you as their coach, to dig in on all the coaching content that we have been planning so far this year. And if a student has taken you up on that opportunity, that's a positive indicator that they're going to persist to next semester. I meant to bring the statistic with me. I don't have it certainly, but I'll look up to confirm it. But that is to say, this is one of the elements too that College Possible has been evaluating the past years, that we have evidence that for students who participate in campaign coaching with their coach, that they are more likely to persist to next semester too. So each of these three things are a very tangible milestone that a student can complete, which gives us a strong indication of if they're likely to come back next semester. So I know that with the fall persistence categories we've used so far, they've been complicated. And the reason I say that is because they've been designed to be very nuanced. They've been designed to try and get at something of a gut check almost of how you feel your student is doing and trying to make it as tangible as possible. But now that we're in a time of year that we have even more tangible milestones that we can keep track of for students' wellness in terms of their college going, that's something that we want to make sure that we are focused on those things primarily to help us prioritize coaching attention to the students who need it most. So what I want us to do next is to have everyone get a chance to read about the standard persistence categories. And so I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to do a new share of my screen, and I'm going to call up a document that overviews the standard persistence categories. Yeah, that'd be great. And Grace is also going to link it in case that probably just works better. In fact, let's just say go to the link because then you can scroll it at the pace that is right for you instead of trying to go through at the pace that I might be moving the screen. But the idea here, let's see, with that, I'm going to stop sharing since you can go into the link now so I can see more faces. So please go into that link for the standard persistence category document, read through it to make sure that you're familiar. To name it, coaches who are returners this year would be well familiar with these. These are the persistence categories that we have used last year. So still, I'd ask that everyone read through these as they, again, go over the indicators I just gave voice to, but they also define each of the 5 categories and what it looks like now. So I'll give us about 5 minutes for independent reading of this, and then we'll come back at 9:47 or 10:47 Eastern, and I'll look for what questions you have that we can talk through. So go ahead and read that, and we'll come back in just a few minutes. Okay, friends, it looks like it has been our 5 minutes. Hopefully that has been sufficient time, but not too much time for you to read and digest the standard persistence categories. So come on back as you're able to. As I mentioned, I'd be interested to hear what questions you have about the standard persistence categories. And to get things going, perhaps a different question. It is my impression, but we'll all have different impressions about this. It's my impression that the standard persistence categories might be more straightforward to digest than the fall persistence categories. I'm wondering, as you read through the standard persistence categories, how clear they feel to you.
Wait, John.
Yeah?
why are there, wait, why do we have two sets? Or like,
Great question, Alana.
yeah, why are they defined differently?
Yeah, happy to answer that.
Okay.
So let's see, to start off, as we start to use standard persistence categories, we will stop using fall persistence categories. So you won't be trying to update both of those things at the same time. The reason that we're shifting to standard persistence categories is we're now entering a time of year when the indicators related to the standard persistence categories of has a student registered for next semester, have they renewed financial aid, have they had a coaching conversation, become more likely, more possible for students to have completed them. So they're more relevant indicators of a student's likelihood to persist to next semester. So we've been using the fall persistence categories so far because in the early stages of the year, these indicators for the standard persistence categories have not yet been as available, as achievable. And we wanted to still have a way for coaches to be able to prioritize their attention to students so that with such a large portfolio as you have, that there's a way at a glance to have that broader view. And so with the fall persistence categories, we're using the indicators that made most sense at that time to stay student focused on what they are able to achieve and how to prioritize students. And now that we have new opportunities with these new indicators, that's why we're making this shift to the standard persistence categories. Does that help answer your question, or is there more there that you'd be interested for us to talk about?
That was helpful.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, Marcella.
So is this updated in the same place on Salesforce as the fall persistence category? It's the same like area under fall 2018?
Yep, that's right. So good question. It is updated in the same field in Salesforce. This is something that we looked into opportunities to have it be a different field, but we weren't able to achieve that because in an ideal setting, it's something that we'd have as a separate field that is being populated from scratch. However, since we weren't able to achieve that in how Salesforce is structured for us, what I would want to give voice to is some of the points involved in that transition too. So the information that each of you have been updating in terms of the fall persistence categories remains really important information to be able to look both on the short term, but also the long term about how we are tracking students' progress. And so knowing that we'll be asking you to update that persistence category with the standard persistence categories, what the steps that College Possible will be taking is to export a report of the persistence categories from the fall that you've already updated so that we retain that information so that we can use that to, among other things, keep an eye on the kind of longitudinal path of your students through the program. But then after we export that data from the persistence category field from the fall, then those will be reset so that it'll help you as a coach have an easier time knowing, okay, which of my students have I updated a standard persistence category for, and which of my students have I yet to do that for? So we've been working with our site support team about how to do that, and the best solution that we're able to achieve is that once we export that data so we can hold on to that, then each of the persistence categories for your students will reset to a 5 as a starting point so that it'll be very clear to you of, okay, I need to update this student and that student, but these students I've already had it updated for. Does that help address your question, Marcella?
If I can hop in, I know
Please.
that this seems like a big ask and maybe a big undertaking from what we've been doing so far. Just want to reiterate that I hope you don't feel like this is a pointless task that we're just asking you to do. This is the one way that College Possible can take a look at the dashboards, that your supervisors can take a look at the dashboards and see in one shot who is likely to persist to the next semester. That's the biggest reason why your schools have partnered with us, right, to help students persist and retain. So this is the one way that we can see that at any given point, knowing that they're fluid, where students are at in your cohort. Also, I think as we head into priority weeks, taking a minute or two to think critically about each individual student, I think can be really helpful. A lot of you may not have talked to students since the first month, given the size of your portfolios. So spending time just revisiting each individual student in your portfolio, checking to make sure that their financial aid status in Salesforce reflects the information that you know, that they've registered, and if so, that they're marked as registered. And updating accordingly. So we're going to put together that report, and I'm working on it right now, that will have all of your students, and then on the right side it will have check boxes for registration, financial aid renewal, and campaign coaching. So you can just click into that report and see at a glance if students have done 2 or 3 of those indicators, and where you need to prioritize either your Salesforce updates or your coaching. Does that help a little bit? And knowing this is why we wanted to give you some extra time today to make these updates. And yeah, if there are any questions about why or different student situations, Denisha, I know that you have a cohort that may look a little bit different. Let's talk about those offline.
Thanks for that, Devin. Are there other questions out there at this stage in thinking about this transition to standard persistence categories?
I do have one more.
Sure.
So if we have a student who doesn't necessarily quite, they kind of fit more in between, let's say, 2.
Okay.
Let's say like their persistence categories, they've met 2 of them, but there's something about the third one, like let's say financial aid, that's still very pressing that could potentially be a barrier. Would you go the worst route, like make it a 3 rather than a 2, just to be safe?
That's a great question. So one of the things about these standard persistence categories is, as you'd see, they're defined by initially how many of these indicators a student has completed, where it's 2 or 3 indicators completed. And here I'm just going to share my screen in case it's helpful for people while listening to follow along visually. Okay, so as you see here for category 1 or category 2, that would be that situation of a student having completed 2 or 3 persistence categories. I'm sorry, persistence indicators. And so Marcella, for the situation you describe of a student has completed maybe 2, but they have an obstacle, I'm drawn to a category 2 for that student because they have completed 2 of the indicators. However, there's a potential barrier towards their persistence.
Okay.
Yeah. For category 3 or 4, those would be situations where a student has completed none of the indicators or just 1. And then there's that judgment call in a way in between those categories where category 3 is a student making positive progress. Category 4 is where we don't know, and likely because the student has not been communicating with their coach to let them know.
Yep. Okay, that's helpful. I was just trying to figure out what is the most important part of the kind of definition part of each category, if it was the persistence indicators or more of like the subjective latter half of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question because it's intended to be a combination. It's intended to have the tangible thing where it starts with the definitions of how many persistence indicators complete. So we start with that, which would be tangible. And then there's that judgment call in a way of, is this student good to go that they're category 1, or is there a barrier that I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to as a coach and keep them as a category 2? That kind of differentiation on a subjective level.
Yeah, and if I can hop in here, Allison, I know you brought up the group of students that you haven't yet been able to connect with. So in these standard persistence categories, like John just touched on, those would likely be category 4 students where they could have registered. You might not have access to that. They might have renewed their financial aid. You haven't had a coaching session, obviously, but that's the students that we want to focus on to help them move into 1s or 2s. And I also want to call it that this is persistence to the next semester. So if they are working through financial aid verification right now for the following year, that may not affect their next semester. So Marcella, if that would be the case, I would put them as a 2, just because it's likely that they'll be back next semester, if that's an ongoing concern.
Yeah, the case I was talking about was a little more, is different than that because they're still working on verification for last year's FAFSA.
Gotcha. Okay.
And having a lot of problems with citizenship.
Okay. Yep.
So that's what I'm saying is like, that's one student where I'm like, oh, it's really up in the air.
Yeah, definitely.
They did register, so I don't, and financially just working with them, so I think I'm comfortable putting it at a 2. Okay. But they haven't even started next year's FAFSA because this year's FAFSA isn't even complete. So
Sure.
Okay. I would say mark them as a 2, and then just, I know you have a smaller cohort, so just keep an eye on where that student is and if they move up to a 1 or a 3 and updating that as you go.
Cool. And thanks for calling out those details. Grace, do you have something? Oh, Sharky has a hand up. Thank you for that. Sharky, do you have a question?
Yes, I had a question. I was wondering, could that same idea that John was just talking about to Marcella, if it was applied to our fall campaign as well, at least in regards to the categories?
I'm not sure if I understand the question yet. Do you mind running it by me one more time?
So, like, you know how this whole fall campaign we've been updating like that persistence category or whatever?
Yeah.
So, like, Marcella just asked you, like, what happens if somebody's like kind of on the fence, like teeter-tottering, you don't know, for say like you haven't got into meeting with that student, or say that like they're in progress of it, say like FAFSA, they're in progress, but like, oh, they can't do it until they go home over break. It's just like that, and you told her like, well, you should fall more towards the 2 instead of putting them in a 3. Does that same mindset standard is going to be followed for like a fall persistent categories?
Okay, gotcha. So do I hear that you're kind of asking, looking in review, kind of looking at what we have been doing with the fall persistence categories?
Yeah, because just my situation is just there's a bunch of my students, and Denisha had brought voice to this earlier, and a couple other people have before. I have a couple students that, like, based off the categories, like they're in progress or trying to finish certain things up, but it's many small barriers that separates them from being like a 2 to a 3 or a 4 from a 3. Like,
gotcha. Cool. Thank you for that. So that one of the things that makes me want to make sure I'm giving voice to as well, with this transition that we're making from the fall persistence categories that you've been working in so far to the standard ones, you wouldn't need to take any further action with fall persistence categories. So later this morning, we have it planned that our site support team is going to be doing those steps I outlined of exporting the existing data that you have of the fall persistence categories recorded for students so that we can retain that, and then doing that resetting of that persistence category field within Salesforce so that for each of your students, it would give you a clean slate to start from. And so then for each of the updates you'll be making, it'll be in this framework of the standard persistence categories. And so for your questions, Sharky, it would be defined in these categories on the screen in front of us for standard persistence categories about, has a student completed 2 or 3 indicators, then they'd be a 1 or a 2, and we have that judgment call about if they have no barriers, they'd be a 1. If they have some barriers, they'd be a category 2. If they haven't completed any indicators or just 1, they'd be a category 3 or category 4. And then that differentiation between those categories in the judgment call, or if you have that information. And 5 in this category is something that we actually didn't have yet a place to call out in the fall persistence categories, which is, do we know a student is definitely not coming back next semester, to be able to differentiate that. Does that help address your question, just acknowledging that we'll be focused on these definitions from this moment moving forward?
Can I clarify what I think I just heard you say?
For sure.
So what I'm hearing you say is, don't mess with the fall categories, like the persistence categories, no more, because that's getting extrapolated today. Only apply these standards, these persistence categories moving forward.
That is correct.
That is not what I was asking.
Okay, swing and a
Hey,
miss.
can I take a stab at it?
Yep.
Please.
Yeah. So I heard you kind of wondering, like, if a student, you're not sure if there could be a 2 or could be a 3, like where you should default to. Is that closer?
Yes.
Okay. I would go with the one that you feel better about. And I say that if it's marking a student as a 3, and that indicates to Laura, your supervisor, or to us that student isn't all clear and that there are still things that you want to work with them on or that they're working on in order to persist to the next semester, mark them as a 3. If you feel like this is something where, like, yeah, they have some barriers, but I know that they're going to be back next semester, might be an ongoing throughout the spring, mark them as a 2. Does that help? So I think there isn't a one size fits all answer to that. We can talk student specific situations if you want, but otherwise I would go to where you feel more comfortable with.
Okay.
I don't think that helped, did it?
No, it kind of did. I just don't. I'll wait and see
Okay.
before. Dude, what time are y'all extrapolating that data?
Bill's working on it right now.
Oh, never mind. It
So
wouldn't even matter.
Yeah, so they're going to be reset to 5s pretty soon. And then I'm planning on sticking around on Zoom. So if anybody wants to go through student-specific situations, even just to get the hang of it or double check that this is the right way to do this, or that you're thinking about it in a way that you think makes sense, please feel free to pop back on or stick around.
Great, thanks, Devin. And Alana, did you have something? Or am I mistaken?
Oh, yeah, I just was thinking, like, I think, like, when last year, I remember, like, persistence categories were, like, hard for me because I felt like it was hard for me to, like, give a number to my students. So now I just, like, not that I've updated all my students with persistence categories, but when I think about updating them inside my head, I don't, like, I try not to like think that much. Like I try and just like go like because I know it's a number and like I know what's more important is like me knowing what's going on in the student's life. I guess I don't know if that helps anybody, but I just wanted to share.
Alana, I'm going to challenge you on that just a little bit. It is you're correct. Most important for you to know what's going on in that student's life. But it's also important that College Possible and people on your campus have an accurate snapshot of where those students' situations are at, and looking at the group, how many are likely to persist or how many have barriers that we need to really focus on in these priority coaching weeks. So if it's like should they be a 2 or a 3 and like not really sure, I think then yeah, don't think about it too hard. And that's kind of what I was getting at, like go with what makes most sense to you. But it is important that these are updated, especially at this point in the year, because this is what the role is supposed to help with. You know, you're as a coach, you're helping students persist and retain, and it's important for us as an organization and your schools as partners to know where your cohort's at any given time.
For sure. Thanks for those points. Something I want to give voice to as we're making this transition to that we haven't named yet is a timeline for accomplishing this. So we are going to be giving you this time this morning in order to get started on this, and not anticipating necessarily that you might be able to get it all done in one sitting, right? You have a lot of students. But it is important that all of your students have an updated standard persistence category before we start up the priority coaching weeks on Monday. And so this is something that the ask to you is to update a standard persistence category for each one of your students by Monday. This is something that's on your supervisor's radar too, so they'll be checking in with you about your progress to make sure that you're on track, because the intent here is that having these standard persistence categories in place by that time can help you effectively focus on the students who are in categories 2, 3, or 4 at this stage, because they're the ones that you can help make the most difference with right now to help ensure that your students are coming back next semester. So wanted to make sure to underscore that timeline to have these completed by this coming Monday. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. We've had a lot of good questions. I really appreciate all the insightful questions that people have raised and ideas. I do want to be mindful of time. I know we were estimating that we would wrap up at 10 o'clock. We're a few minutes past that. And I do have one other thing that I want to make sure to introduce before we would proceed. And that is semester summaries. With this, some of you may already be familiar with semester summaries as one of the parts that lives within the Salesforce profile for students. In particular, if you support students who have been in the program previously. Some of you are serving students who are just new to the program this year, so they wouldn't have already had a semester summary in place. But for our students who have been in the program before this year, they would have one in place that you may have been referencing yourself. I'm going to share my screen to share Salesforce just to show you where where I'm looking, where these live, so we can talk about them a little bit. Okay. All right, so hopefully you're all seeing my Salesforce screen now, and I have my good friend Darth Vader. So the semester summary lives within the academic semester. And so let's see, if I go into the academic semester I have open for Darth Vader. Let's just start from scratch. Okay, I'll go to Darth Vader, and hopefully my internet supports this endeavor.
While John's internet is doing its best, feel free to jump on Salesforce and like try this out with a student in your portfolio if you want to go to a contact page that you own.
Good idea. Okay, unfortunately my internet is struggling. Okay. Bum, bum, bum. So let me at least give a voiceover for the time being. And Grace or Devin, if you're able to call this up in my stead, I would appreciate that. And then we might be able to share your screen instead. But within the academic semester for each of your students, one of the elements there is a semester summary. It asks, I believe, 3 questions that we would be asking you to complete for each of your students. This is something that we do for each semester that a student is in the program, as hopefully what it sounds like, a brief summary of how the student's been doing this semester, as a resource for yourself, who's supporting so many students to keep track of, as well as for future coaches. We know that coaches serve for 1 year or maybe 2, and then new coaches step in to support the students you support now. And let's see, it looks like Grace, you're sharing your screen. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so if we go to the right side of the screen to the academic semesters. And we can select the most recent one, Spring 2018, Augsburg University. Oh, sorry. It does not matter. Looking at the bottom of the list. Thank you. Okay, and so now we are into the academic semester, and if we scroll down a bit, and a little bit further, okay, here we have semester summary. And so there are 3 parts of the semester summary. What's listed as the summary, the relationship with the coach, the graduation plan, and career aspirations. Oh, I'm actually going to ask if we can cancel and go back to where we were. Because what I want to highlight are the information boxes next to each of these, because this provides a reminder of what we're looking for each of these fields. So for the summary, the ask is to summarize students' any challenges they've experienced over the past semester related to academic, social, or financial barriers that they've encountered. For the relationship with the coach, similarly, we're looking for a quick summary of the student's overall engagement with you as their coach and any significant points of connection that you've had. And then the third and final part of the semester summary is to provide detail around the student's graduation plan and any long-term career goals. So the idea here in capturing this for students each semester of their journey to a college degree is, as I was saying, to support you in coordinating efforts around so many students and also future coaches to have this kind of information at a glance that they will be able to refer to. It's something that can help inform coaching in an impactful way. And so with this, as we're wrapping up the fall semester, we wanted to make sure to get semester summaries on your radar because we know that it is something that we don't anticipate that you've been working on these yet as we're introducing this today for the semester, but want to give you plenty of time to be chipping away at this. I think we can end the screen share now, Grace, thank you. To give you plenty of time to chip away at this because even writing a brief summary for each of your students, you still have a lot of students, it would take a lot of time. And so the timeline that we're looking for this to be complete by would be the end of January. So giving you a good window of time here between now and then so that each of your students would have this summary in place before we get into February. So I know it's an additional step that you wouldn't have been accomplishing already, I would imagine, but it is something that plays an important part in informing future coaching. So I'm not sure if there are initial questions about semester summaries now. You certainly might have them now. Otherwise, it's something that we welcome questions on this topic anytime between now and as you're working on them up until the end of January. Okay. Seeing none, hearing none for the time being, please, raise questions as you encounter them as you're working on your semester summaries. But I will see that, I guess, as a part where we can close what I was looking to cover. Devin, did you have something?
Yeah, I do. I am putting this in this chat and then I'll send it in Slack as well. But here's the report that I created that has your students, what category they all are, which they're all 5s right now, and then the indicators on the right. So going through each student, you can already see who has checks, who has a check mark or an X to indicate that they've completed those. So hopefully this helps drive your persistence category updates. It's helpful to keep one tab open and then maybe just duplicate screens on the students' portfolio or on the students' pages as well. So I will be sticking around. Thank you all for listening. I know that these are big changes coming at once, so take a second to digest what you just heard and let me know if you have any questions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Devin. All right. If there isn't anything else from the group, that is the end of the content that we had for today. And I hope that this extra time back for you, that you're able to use to chip away at some of these items that you'll be working on. Anything else for the good of the group before we wrap up?
Dow, Devante, and Niat, if you want to hang on here with us for a couple minutes to make sure that you all got the information that you missed from hopping on a little bit late.
Devin and John, I actually have a question that's UC specific, so I might hang on for a second before logging off.
Sounds good. Thanks, Allison. Okay. All right. So unless you're those individuals Grace just gave a name to, I think that we're all set for you to head off and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday chipping away at these tasks, and good luck connecting with your students.
So Devin and John, I'm just wondering, because I know that if one of the students on our caseloads transfers universities, that they're no longer really a part of it. But I also know that College Possible's agreement is with the College of Arts and Sciences at UC. And I have a few students who next semester will be transferring to other colleges within UC, like Lindner and DAP. Do they stay on my caseload, or should I also take them off?
That is a good question. I'm going to have to touch base with Pam about that. I believe
she actually sent me to touch base with you guys because she doesn't know either.
Okay, well, good. I believe we had talked about them not staying in your portfolio.
That's my recollection as well.
So I would still update them for now and make sure that they're registering and good to go in their next college. And then next semester, we'll probably look to inactivate.
Okay, cool. All right, that was all I got. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Good question. See ya. Okay, so we have Dow, Devante, and Niat who joined us at some point in the presentation. I'm not sure at what point each of you stepped in. Can you let me know?
I joined in when you guys were talking about the persistence category, right before Sharky asked it his question.
Okay, cool. Devante, how about you?
Yeah, so I came on around that same time, right around when you go on the persistence categories and when Sharky asked this question.
Okay. And Niat, you?
Yeah, I joined in around the same time as well, around the persistence category.
Okay, great. And so I know that what we were covering first was kind of providing context of wrapping up the fall campaign this Friday. So still trying to reach those goals for the fall campaign of 90% of your students having a campaign coaching conversation with you. And then the big part that we emphasized a lot was that transition to from what we've known of the fall persistence categories to the standard persistence categories. So at the point that you joined, did you each get to see the overview of the standard persistence categories?
Yeah. I just wanted to double check. So changing from the fall persistence category to the standard persistent category, that means that we'll be working with that throughout the whole year now? Is that kind of what you mean?
That's right, yes.
Okay. And we'll constantly be updating it instead of just updating it, like, for example, at the beginning of the semester and then maybe once more at the end of the semester. Now it'll be constantly updating just to keep a check on the statuses of students. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And the intent for both kinds of categories is that there's something that gets updated on an ongoing basis. So I'm glad you asked, because it's the kind of thing that as you're meeting with a student, if you are hearing that they've made progress, that and now if they've completed financial aid renewal, or if they have registered for next semester, or if they had a campaign coaching conversation with you, but they didn't before, in addition to other updates you'd be making in Salesforce, one of the updates to make is to update their persistence category while you're in there already in that student's record. So it's something that would be updated on an ongoing basis.
Okay.
Yeah, good question.
And then I'm going to pull us back real quick, just a little bit. In the chat, I'm putting, Thanks. In the chat, I'm putting a PDF that gives an overview of priority coaching weeks. And I think you all jumped on around when we were giving this context, but maybe right after. So I want to make sure you have sort of the larger picture of why we're talking about these different persistence categories. So you know that the fall campaign is ending this Friday. And then Monday, we're starting a new sort of shorter campaign, which is the priority coaching weeks. And if you click through that link, you'll be able to see the goals and objectives for those couple weeks. So basically the first 3 weeks of December. So you will be continuing the support that you've been giving to your students so far in the fall campaign, but focusing on specific students who might be the most at risk for not coming back after their winter break. And that's why we're talking about these persistence categories so much right now, is that before students leave for break, we want you all to be giving the most attention to students who need it the most. And we're judging that based on these specific indicators of whether or not they have renewed their FAFSA, whether they've registered for classes next semester, and whether they've had a campaign coaching conversation with you, because we know that those are the three biggest indicators for letting us know whether or not they're likely to come back. So does that make sense? Do you all have any questions about those priority coaching weeks?
So for the standard persistence, is that only going to take place or is that going to continue afterwards too?
John, you're muted.
No, I'm not. Thanks for the heads up. I was saying there's a little bit of audio I was having trouble hearing. I don't know if others were hearing that too. But Dow, did I hear your question is if standard persistence categories are going to be used just for priority coaching weeks or beyond that too?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, they are going to be used beyond that too. So it would be ongoing beyond the priority coaching weeks.
Okay.
Any other questions out there, either about the standard persistence categories or the priority coaching weeks? And I guess to confirm, did you all catch the detail in terms of the timeline for updating a standard persistence category for each of your students?
Before next Monday?
You got it. Yeah, and so hopefully now, I believe, Devin, maybe you can confirm that these have been reset now? within Salesforce? Great. So starting now, effective immediately, you can begin updating the standard persistence category for each of your students. And so hopefully during this time, since we're having a shorter Ducks today, you can get a jump start on that and be in really good shape to complete that step well ahead of Monday's deadline.
And then one more detail that I'm not sure if you all caught or not, but we did export all of the fall persistence categories that you've all entered already. So it's not like those have been like a waste of time, they're gone. It's that now we're giving you the opportunity to take a critical look at each of your students and make sure you know exactly where they're at in terms of those indicators before they leave for break. So we do have that information that we've exported on our end. So that's why they're all reset back to 5s now, so that you can look through that report that Devin linked you all to a couple minutes ago and take another look at each of the students in your portfolio. Dow, it sounds like there's a foghorn behind you.
Oh, my roommate's using that here in Brian.
I think it's just some goofy stuff with your mic, probably. You're good.
Well, anything else, either questions from coaches or other thoughts from Grace or Devin that we should give voice to before we would wrap up?